I think that some of the contradictions in the data in terms of the health of the overall economy versus labor force participation comes to three big questions that the data doesn't answer for us, which is, did the same jobs come back? Did they come back in the same configuration? And most importantly, if each subsequent quote-unquote recovery leads to decreased labor force participation, what does that mean about the future of work, which has huge ramifications on wages, on the rise of the gig economy, on automation, and all these trends that are top of mind for supply chain professionals.
This is Radical Reinvention, a show by 0100 about reimagining the global supply chain. I'm Kevin O'Mara. I've spent over 30 years working in supply chain, and in that time, I've learned a lot about how we move stuff and the people who move that stuff around the planet. I've also learned that supply chain doesn't always move with the planet or people in mind. So, our mission at 0100 is an ambitious one for sure. We're pushing the biggest companies in the world toward a 0% carbon, 100% digitized global supply chain. This means a world where people's needs are met, but the planet is preserved. We believe it's possible, but we know we can't do it alone. That's why we're here right now, building a community of the world's most innovative supply chain pioneers and industry experts, then working together to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing the planet and humanity today. And we're inviting all of you along for the ride. Join us as we work to create a sustainable and responsible supply chain, one radical reinvention at a time. Today's episode is about what's at the very center of the supply chain in any industry: people, labor, workers, which makes the ongoing labor shortages especially unsettling. And now that the world is returning to normal, whatever that is, post-COVID, expectations to get back to work are higher than ever. Problem is, workers just aren't interested in going back to the way things used to be. This is as much a social issue as it is an economic one. So, what will it take to get them back? The answer, I think, is simple. More money. A lot more. Significantly higher wages. I'm talking $25 or more an hour for work that used to be paid minimum wage. Higher wages will also help combat things like ongoing inflation and recession. But what does that mean for modern companies? Can they really afford to increase wages that much? I don't think they have much of a choice, honestly. Today's persistent labor shortages are proof of that. It makes me wonder, could this moment be an opportunity to move the supply chain closer to the future we're imagining here at 0100? The interesting thing about higher wages is it actually drives up investment in capital and technology, which drives automation. In other words, digitizing your operations and supply chain is actually enhanced by spending more on labor because it forces you to think about how to make more of that labor with better use of technology. So the wage increase actually drives the mission of digitizing and ultimately decarbonizing the supply chain. For this episode, I wanted to talk to folks who understand this issue in real ways and from both sides. First, one of our producers, Victoria, spoke with Saru Jayaraman to get an idea of what this moment is like for our workers. Saru is the director of the Fair Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley and the president of One Fair Wage, an organization that advocates for living wages for restaurant workers in the U.S. After that, I'll sit down with Colin and Eddie from our research team to dig into some data points around labor statistics over the last 5 years. Then I'll talk to Jasmine Donovan of Dick's Drive-In, an enormously popular burger chain in the Seattle area. Dick's is a fantastic case study for this topic because they've long paid highly competitive wages and invested in workers far beyond industry standards. By the end of the episode, we should have new insights about the recent labor shortages and what they mean for the future of automation. I'm excited to see what we come up with. So let's jump into things with Victoria, one of our show producers. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Kevin.
Okay, so you talked to Saru at One Fair Wage. What can you tell me about that conversation? What stood out for you?
So there are three big things that stood out for me from my conversation with Saru. The first is that while she's been doing this work advocating on behalf of food service and restaurant workers for over 20 years, and she really emphasized and made this point several times, she said there is enormous power in this moment we're in right now. She said this is an unprecedented time.
This is not a once in a lifetime or a once in a generation moment. This is a once in a nation's history moment, because suddenly what the National Restaurant Association has been lobbying since 1919 to maintain this $2 wage, what they have always said is impossible, is now happening as the trend. We have tracked 4,200 restaurants in all 43 states that pay a sub-minimum wage that are now paying 15, 20, 25, 30. I've seen restaurants paying $50 an hour plus tips because they cannot get staff to come back any other way. In my opinion, this is one of the largest unorganized strikes, frankly, that we've seen in U.S. history. Workers just refusing to work for these wages and saying, I will come back if you actually pay me a livable wage. We don't call them labor shortages. We call them wage shortages because there is not a shortage of people willing to work in these jobs. There's a shortage of people willing to work for these wages.
The second thing we talked about that I thought was really interesting for this issue is this presumed threat of what the consequences would be for businesses, particularly restaurants, and the economy if these workers get what they're demanding, if they get these significantly increased wages.
Biden introduced a $15 minimum wage as part of his first COVID relief package at the beginning of last year. And at that time, the Restaurant Association did what they always do, said, oh, this will kill the industry. Everybody will go out of business. Nobody will be able to survive. And in that same moment, the CFO of Denny's was caught telling shareholders in an analyst call, actually paying 15 plus tips in California has resulted in Denny's, in his word, outperforming the system in California, because he said, we pay people more and guess what they do? They go spend it. They tip better. And so Denny's has grown faster in California than any other state in the US because they pay people more.
The last bit I wanted to share from my conversation with Saru is what she had to say about what automation means from the perspective of workers and whether they saw automation as something that helped restaurant and food service workers in the long run, or if it was something that detracted from their cause.
I've actually done a lot of research on automation because long before the pandemic, the Restaurant Association used for years the threat that, oh, if you make us raise wages, we'll just replace you all with robots. And the more you make us raise wages, the less jobs there'll be because of automation. So we actually looked at all the different kinds of automation in the restaurant industry, ranging from sometimes in the casual restaurants, they tried the tablets where you could actually just order on a tablet. In San Francisco and Boston, they actually tried to create a fully automated restaurant, which was like basically a walk-in vending machine. They tried to automate various parts of cooking and preparing in places like Panera and other quick service places. And nowhere ever did we see automation actually curb the number of jobs that were growing in the restaurant industry. In fact, the data showed that the places with the highest levels of automation, like San Francisco, right here, Silicon Valley, actually had the fastest job growth of any region in the United States. And it was because every time you try to implement automated anything, you need people to actually do something. So the fully automated restaurants here in San Francisco were not actually 100% fully automated. They had to hire people to monitor, to look over, to make sure things were working properly.
The big takeaway for me really is this is a big one-time request for more money. It should be that the whole system works better for everybody who works in the restaurant industry. But for those who are on the business side of this equation, I think what you end up seeing is an opportunity to pay more and at the same time automate and improve the value prop of what you're offering. It's going to keep on changing. And I think what we see at this moment and through this lens that Saru has shared with us is you're going to have to embrace what your workers are asking for and find a way to take the good of that and build it into your business model and take the bad of that and solve it for the benefit of all involved. But I think it's more of an opportunity than it is a threat. And I think it's really kind of a, like Saru said, a once in a nation chance to do things differently. Very exciting. And Victoria, I really appreciate the way that you helped me think through some of the angles that I think were important for the 0100 listeners. Thanks again, both of you. Before I talk to Jasmine over at Dick's Drive-In, I wanted to get some insights from our research team. I think it's an interesting way to look at the work we do here at 0100 and then see how it ties back to parallels between what the data tells us and what we're learning from some of these folks we're talking to, like, for instance, Jasmine coming up. And to do that, I want to get a couple of guys on the team in here. Colin and Eddie, welcome to the show. Why don't you guys quickly introduce yourself?
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me. There was a dangerous rumor going around that you were starting up a podcast, so happy to be among some of the initial guests. Background, I run our research science division at 0100. I usually communicate in charts and figures and numbers, and so this particular audio format might not be conducive to that conversation, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we will see, Colin. I'll give you a chance to make some color out of these big numbers. Eddie, why don't you introduce yourself too, and then we'll get rolling.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me. I'm a research analyst within Colin's team, the research science team at 0100. And unlike Colin, who talks in graphs and tables and numbers, I just like talking a lot. So I think this will be a great opportunity for everybody.
Well, see if we can marshal some of that enthusiasm. Colin, I'm going to come to you first. It's all about jobs. It's all about the nature of work going forward and automation. One of the big questions to really ground us is the data itself. Do you want to first tell me a little bit about how you took a look at this data, what your thoughts were coming out of it, and what do you think are the big trends that we need to be aware of in terms of just the facts as you can see them in the data?
So I think we want to start at a high altitude and remember that there are lots of ways at looking at the labor market, and that can include the unemployment rate, labor force participation, employment to population ratios. What's interesting about the data is that all of these indicators basically say the same thing, and they say something that is a little bit contradictory with regards to kind of the present economic environment. All of these numbers are surprisingly good within the context of the United States and often stand in opposition to other negative macroeconomic indicators as we enter a potentially recessionary environment. You don't need to look at the numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to understand this weird dichotomy, because if you I'm pulling up my newsfeed right now and looking at the headlines from NYT and Wall Street Journal and a bunch of supply chain sources, and you see these big headlines. The US has reversed pandemic job losses. Factory jobs are booming like it's the 1970s. Jobs are back, baby. These are real headlines.
Yeah, I think the anecdotal evidence is that we're begging for people. And actually, we had a conversation with one of our bigger members, footwear and apparel side. I won't name them just out of respect for privacy, but they said, we talked about talent. What's your problem? And they said, really, it's not the white collar talent. It's the blue collar talent. What I wanted to understand is workforce patient down in the data, because that would coincide with what we're seeing, which is having a hard time filling some of these jobs despite, and everybody's doing this, raising the wages, trying to improve the benefits, trying to offer a better deal, and still the jobs go wanting. When you look at the subcategories of the labor force and how it's changing, women dropped out of the workforce just like men when COVID hit, but the men came back and the women didn't in that data. What do you think is the story behind the change in participation amongst women in the workforce, and what does that mean for trying to get enough employment to fill these jobs?
The data has shown that one of the main reasons women had to stop working was because of childcare. And we're still trying to recover from that. Both men and women suffered a minus 3% drop in labor force participation right at the height of the pandemic. But women's labor force participation today is still indexing a percentage point lower, which may not sound like much, but it really does translate to about 1 million fewer women in the workforce.
This is a huge element in the HR circles of what are the consequences of having a potential lost generation that is on the gender divide, and how much does that set us back?
And what is the story in terms of those who've left and not come back? What's the breaking point? Where do they see enough of a value prop to come back to work?
I have two thoughts on this. One is, I think the big question on everybody's mind is, what is a sufficient wage increase to counteract for the great resignation, the great reshuffling, whatever we want to call this trend? And then the other part of this is, how does this differ on an industry by industry basis? Because I think it is more nuanced than people like to admit. So on the first point, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it depends on what your reference point is. We see a ton of positive stories in the press that individual organizations are rushing past the federal minimum wage. But On the other hand, the ugly truth remains that the minimum wage has remained static for so long that when you normalize it, when you adjust it for inflation, especially the inflation that we've seen over the past couple quarters, minimum wage today is 30% less than it was going into the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009. And it's 40% below where it was in 1968, which was kind of the peak before the only similar inflationary period in living memory. And I think that is creating an incredible amount of noise and interference in the data. And Kevin, I think you just wrote a Signal post on this, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you summarized it as this is a one-time opportunity for employers to make this great leap forward and move ahead of where the puck is headed very slowly in policy circles. It is an opportunity for supply chain professionals.
I think the one-time call to action here, the one-time ask for a doubling of your pay, is also a one-time opportunity to look for a move toward automation to make that work more productive and more valuable per hour. The interesting thing that I think about from companies trying to respond to this pressure and automate to make that payback better and therefore justify a wage that's going to attract people, because clearly, given this, the inflation adjusted wage increases are really not that great of a deal, or we wouldn't have all these jobs wanting. I want to cut over to something that's also part of this digital revolution. And Eddie, I'm going to come to you on this. Gig work. This keeps coming up. How is gig work affecting the feelings of people who are maybe sitting on the sidelines saying, yeah, 15 bucks an hour, that's not enough. 18 bucks an hour, not quite. 20, 25 bucks an hour, maybe still not. Why? Is it the gig work option?
Well, I mean, you're starting to see a lot more flexibility. People are wanting to work at their own hours, at their own pace, just be like their own boss in a sort of way. And so we see that with different types of gig work. And if we dig into the stats a little bit, we see that 1 in 6 US adults have earned money through an online gig platform. And that contributed around $1.2 trillion to the US economy in 2020.
I hear a lot of people saying how these gig jobs they're really hard and it's brutal, but people seem to want to keep doing that. And I will say this, the appeal of gig work from the worker perspective has pros and cons. And I hear all the time from different perspectives. From the business side, those who employ gig work as part of their business model, Amazon Flex, for instance, has a gig model, Amazon Flex drivers. It doesn't work as well as blue badged Amazon drivers. I can tell you that from the inside. And the reason is it's unpredictable. The lack of predictability makes it hard to work from an operations and supply chain standpoint because you can't forecast reliably what you're going to have in the house. And yet, I think that some of the innovation in this gig work model is very promising if you take that gig work platform and extend its capabilities. Instacart comes to mind. We have an article on this too. Instacart isn't really just gig work. Instacart is a tech platform that provides an extension of online channel capabilities to retailers who don't necessarily want to have their own e-commerce delivery. So there's an opportunity that's beneficial to the business. And to me, that feels a little like it gets to some of the stuff we talked about, the deal, a wage that's up, but inflation adjusted, not good enough to bring people in. How does automation change the equation? It's been pretty rough. You know, my son was an Instacart shopper, and it's pretty hard to feel like you're getting a good deal out of that, but it's coming up and it's getting better. And I think part of the reason is the customers, CVS, Home Depot, Office Depot, whatever, they benefit from having this online channel that they otherwise would have to develop themselves. There's a bigger question, and Colin, I'll let you jump back to gig work if you want, but it's automation in general, right? We're investing in tech, we're digitizing the supply chain, and it's not just robots or self-driving vehicles. It is things like these gig work platforms. Where do you see the automation fitting into this deal? And does that square the circle in any way that you can think of in terms of the deal, a wage that's up, but inflation adjusted, not good enough to bring people in? How does automation change the equation?
Before we unpack that, just one final comment on gig work. And I think for me, the best way to phrase it is that I think there is a difference between gig work versus flexible work. When we look at gig work, it's traditionally defined in 4 categories: ride hailing, grocery delivery, food delivery, errands, things that you mentioned, very established platforms. And when we look at the labor force participation numbers, those are the things that are driving one, record number of workers who define themselves as independent, and 2, a record number of multiple job holders. And there is this trade-off between the flexibility that gig affords versus whether or not, and this is very important in supply chain, whether or not it establishes a career trajectory. And so when we look at what's happening with the Great Resignation on an industry by industry basis, we see this splintering effect in that some areas that are heavily dependent on, quote, gig work, such as hospitality and food services, they're off the charts in terms of quit rates, in terms of churn. But conversely, if you look at elements of manufacturing, especially durable goods, they're off the charts in terms of unfilled job openings. And I think that sets up the debate for, depending on what industry you're talking about, what is the potential for automation and what is it being driven by? Kevin, you and I worked on a report recently, and we called it upskilling and reskilling in the age of automation, or the new age of automation, rather, that's really defined by advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And what's unique about this substitution between capital equipment and traditional labor is it is a new phenomenon. People try to group it into what happened 10 to 20 years ago in the services industry, but because manufacturing is in the vanguard of this shift, we are talking about a different trend and a different animal here. We talked to a lot of people in industry, but we also looked at some hard data. And what was really interesting about the data is that we believe it suggests, or looking at various sources, we can triangulate which of the industries is going to be the first of the dominoes to really accelerate through this new age of automation and see real dividends from it. And the sources that we tried to triangulate between, outside of the labor data that we just discussed, are from the World Economic Forum and others over the last couple of years of what are the share of activities, industry by industry, that are prone or susceptible to automation, which varies widely. And so that gives you one prioritization list. But just because you can automate something doesn't mean you will or you should, because there are other considerations. There are the labor considerations, there's the cost efficiencies, there's the distribution of your business model, et cetera. So we laid on other sources of data, such as rising or falling productivity rates going into the pandemic before things went to hell in a handcart. And what we saw is that when you combine productivity rates with the potential for automation, you get to this sweet spot where in rank order, the industries that have declining productivity and high potential for automation are number 1, manufacturing, number 2, hospitality and food services, number 3, retail trade, number 4, construction, and number 5, the services industry. It's almost the inverse of previous automation over the last couple decades. And ding, 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 it aligns directly with the industries, with the exception of construction, which is heavily driven by infrastructure spending. It aligns directly with the industries where we're seeing these record quit rates, these record unfulfilled job openings, and the recognition that pretty soon manufacturers aren't going to have the luxury of choice of which path they go down, because unless labor can meet the individual demands, we are going to need to use automation to continue to fill this persistent gap in supply and demand.
So much interesting stuff here. We could talk about these insights for hours, but we'll let you guys get back into it. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for having us on here. It's been a blast.
So Eddie and I's jobs here are done. Thank you for my first and possibly last appearance on Radical Reinvention. My ears are so sweaty in these headphones, so we got to sign off here soon.
You can find our full catalog of research reports on our website at 0100.com. We'll also throw all of the links Colin and Eddie referenced into the show notes in the episode description. Okay, now let's jump into my conversation with Jasmine Donovan of Dick's Drive-In. Dick's is a third-generation family-owned burger chain that's been serving the Seattle area for nearly 70 years. Not only is the restaurant a local favorite for a quick meal, but they've also become well-known for being a fantastic place to work, where wages start at $20 an hour. I wanted to know more about what Dick's is doing, why they do it, and how they make it work for the business. I also wanted to find out how the current shortages are affecting them, and how much they've turned to automation in recent years. So I'm really excited to talk to Jasmine and learn more about how these things are all happening in real time in one place. Welcome, Jasmine, and thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm going to start off just by asking you to tell me a little bit about Dick's approach to the company, the design of the business, the infrastructure around employees.
Sure. We have about 300 employees in about 8 locations. So employees are really critical to what we do. My grandfather started the business with 2 partners back in 1954. And since day one, we wanted to pay the best wages and benefits in the industry because we wanted the best employees to create the best customer experience. My grandfather had a business philosophy, which was step 1, a business has to make a profit. They have to offer something of value to customers that they're willing to pay for, that they see the value of. And then step 2 is to invest in your employees, because when you invest in your employees, you have happier employees, your employees are better trained, they take better care of your customers. That is what he called a virtuous cycle that helps you make more profit, and then you can do more of everything. It's always been part of what we do, and that is still true today.
What do you think led him to approach such a forward-thinking frame of mind? Where do you think that came from?
My grandfather ended up being drafted in World War II, ended up serving in the Pacific as an enlisted sailor. Because of that experience, got to go to college on the GI Bill, and that changed his life. And one of the hallmark benefits that we're known for is our scholarship program. So we have a $28,000 college scholarship program that our employees have access to right after they pass their first skills test. They can use that scholarship to pursue what they're passionate about while they work for us at least 20 hours a week. And it has launched the careers of people who are now working all over the world, and we call them our alumni employees. There's a woman studying giraffes in Africa. There's an avionics engineer programming spaceships. There's entrepreneurs and bakers and lawyers and doctors and nurses. And we're just so proud of being a part of the journey that our employees take. The same benefit can be used for childcare. So if you're at a time in your life when the scholarship program isn't effective for you, but childcare would be helpful, you can use that same money, and we pay that money to a childcare provider. And so we've had some people go back and forth between using it for scholarship and then next year using it for childcare.
I had some sense of the degree of commitment you have to investing in your people, but I didn't realize how far it went. What raises the question for me, and I think any of our listeners are going to have the same thing, which is, how do you make it work? That's a lot to invest in employees, but obviously it's working because it goes all the way back. So what are the pros and cons of paying up and investing in people this intensively that cause you to keep going?
The first answer to that is it's been part of our purpose. It continues to be part of our purpose. And so it's how our business model is designed from the beginning. So we start at $20 an hour here. And then as you gain skills, you get wage increases. And then we have quarterly bonuses. And the pay range for a crew member goes up to $25 an hour. And all of our managers are hired from within. So there's additional compensation for every level of management that you achieve. It works for us for a number of reasons. We are a low margin, high volume business. So one of the reasons that we can make this work is we depend on employees, like most restaurants do, but we really depend on employees to operate our restaurants well and efficiently. And the better trained our employees are, the better our operation runs. It behooves us to pay at the top of the wage market for our employees so that we get the best and we reward them as they continue to train up and gain skills. And we recognize as well that our employees most of them are not going to be with us forever. A vast majority of our employees, this will be one part of their journey. And again, investing in them makes them committed to being here while they are pursuing that. It makes them passionate about our business.
Let me shift gears slightly and ask you about the pandemic. I think I heard you say you didn't lay off anyone during COVID, a restaurant business that didn't lose a single job or didn't fire a single person?
We did not. One caveat I will add to that, though, is people transition naturally. And once COVID started to change,
you didn't replace.
Yeah, we didn't always replace people when they left on their own, but we did not fire or lay off anyone during the pandemic.
So to the question about worker shortages, which is everybody's talking about in every industry, and hospitality is arguably the worst. perhaps was less of a problem for you because first off, you didn't let anybody go. Secondly, your reputation's so good. Is it true that you didn't suffer much from the worker shortage that everybody else experienced?
No, actually, we need lots of people. I need 38 people right now at the crew level. Part of this is we were crazy enough and believed enough in our why that we opened another location in December of 2021. We wanted to continue to serve customers in our community, and so we opened another location.
It's not that you can't find people, it's that you keep on wanting more, is it?
It's a combination, and there are some factors in our environment that were there before COVID
Right.
that I think COVID has dramatically changed. There's a perfect storm of factors happening right now that's impacting the labor market and making it difficult for us to stay staffed up. And I know you had mentioned automation. If you had asked me 2 years ago if automation or robotics or machinery would have a place in our kitchens, I would have said no, right? Employees are why we do what we do. This is not something that was going to work for us. But after watching my kitchens run short staffed for a year and a half now, and the toll that's taking on people, we're going to have to do that to make our jobs sustainable for those people who still want them.
Which means, going back to what you said about automation, I see that you have a great employer pitch, but automation is a place where we see this across all of our members of the 0-100 community is a lot more automation, trying to augment the workers you have. And I guess as you look out there and all of these forces come together, you see a need and an opportunity to keep on building investments in automation, keep on participating in the way things change. How do you think about, for instance, the gig economy and those folks who jump in and become Uber Eats drivers or Instacart shoppers or whatever? Is that good, bad, or indifferent for your business?
It certainly impacts us. One of our core values is industriousness, and it has to do with our employees who work very hard to improve their lives through professional growth and personal growth. And you see it in the employees who are working for us and going to school, or working for us and supporting family members overseas or home, wherever that is, or working hard to have financial stability. So those people have access to lots of different ways now to supplement their income. Our schedule is pretty restrictive in the sense that it's hard for employees to just grab hours whenever they feel like right now. We have a very stable schedule. A lot of restaurants and quick serves in particular have gotten a bad rap, and there's all the secure scheduling regulation going around. We have for a very long time scheduled people on what's called a quarterly basic. And so you get a schedule that you can commit to for the entire quarter, but we depend on our employees committing to those hours as well. And it used to be that they were grateful that we would commit to them for those hours, but now that's almost a hindrance to those people who have access to the gig economy, who are creating art or special things on Etsy and selling it, or who are driving for Instacart or Uber, and they want to be able to flex their schedule to maximize their gig economy options along with the stable base schedule and benefits that we provide. And right now it's hard for us to accommodate that. And that is part of why we struggle to retain employees in this economy. And it's something, when we get to automation, one of the ways that we need to do better is we need to invest in scheduling software in the next year that allows us to provide the level of flexibility that a lot of our employees are craving, because they can't maximize what they can do in this economy with our restrictive schedule. And right now, we have a system that's worked really well for us for many decades, but it's paper and pencil based, and it doesn't do well with quick changes. So we need an automated system that makes it possible for our managers to offer that level of flexibility to employees.
What would be the ideal scenario in terms of your business and the role of labor, automation? How do you imagine the future looking with automation, demographics, and the changing nature of work fitting together?
There are some large restaurant quick serve chains that you've seen experiment with different kind of robotics. It's still very much in an R&D phase and does have a big impact to the layout of a kitchen. The layout of our kitchen is part of the secret to our success because it creates a very efficient setup. And so figuring out how machinery, for example, or whether it's robotics or human-operated machine, can make us more efficient is something that we will continue to investigate and learn more about. And then on the software side, there's opportunities for AI, and that's more of like the scheduling side or assistance for our grill runners and wrappers to get a better sense of timing for cooking and how much we need at any given point. And there's other things that may be less visible, but one of the things that customers love about us is that it feels the same, right? Things do change over time, but it feels the same. There's a connection. There's taste and smell are linked to memory recall in the brain, and our customers make memories with our food. And we need to continue to give them the opportunity to relive those memories when they enjoy our food, whatever that looks like. If it means that customers sometimes order on their phone instead of at the window and then go to the window to grab it, maybe that will make us be able to be efficient but have more reasonable labor. And that means that people aren't running short to keep the kitchen running. This will not be we find the solution and it'll be perfect forever. And the next generations are going to have to make their own adaptations, but we will continue to strive for great customer experience and is good for our employees too.
Jasmine, listen, I got to tell you, you are an inspiring person to talk to. I'm really enjoying this. I'm out of time now. I'm going to have to thank you for spending so much time with us and giving us so many interesting things to think about.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I really enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to listening to the podcast.
Really great insight from Jasmine. A couple of things really stood out to me. Number one is even with the amazing employer value proposition they have to offer, they still have open positions to fill. Number two is the importance of automation and where it fits into this equation. And even in a business like flipping burgers, which in principle shouldn't be particularly automation friendly, they're going to look for it. You're going to have to figure out a way to make automation work in this formula. And that means being creative and aggressive about investing in it early. It then ties back to the stuff she said about designing apps for the customer to interface with their scheduling system, which is an incredible example of automation taken to its full potential. How do I automate the customer engagement, the order process, the mechanization of the production and the prep, the scheduling, the whole thing? And I don't know why that wouldn't be a very strong place to jump off of to go after things like engaging customers' willingness to help with sustainability initiatives or community support initiatives in the way that you price and package and deliver whatever it is you sell. 100%. What Dix is doing can be scaled simply by applying these high philosophies. She said many times, we know why we're doing what we're doing. The mission-driven business is a powerful business. It draws people, it holds customers, it governs behavior because you're not sub-optimizing constantly. You could always save a nickel by foregoing some inventory, and then if you miss the customer promise, you're undermining the long-run benefit. Penny wise and pound foolish. Knowing the why, which she talked about, is scalable. Anybody can do that. Being more practical about this, the most scalable thing of what she talked about is investing enough in your human component, your employees, and this would include your CFO, just as much as it includes a trainee at the counter. Invest enough in them that they are prepared to enhance your investment in technology so that you're getting a virtuous circle. She used that phrase too. If you have a virtuous circle in which your humans are not only capable of working with, but happy to work with the capital equipment, the technology, the machinery, the systems that you build, the systems will get better faster because the humans will refine them, and the humans will get better faster because the machinery will enable them. So the whole thing is a feedback loop. It's 100% scalable. I don't know why it wouldn't apply to absolutely anything, literally anything. Making shoes to mining iron, it's all going to be following the same equation. Invest in the people at the same time that you invest in the tech, and you can pursue your mission. And if your mission is to decarbonize the supply chain, that's everywhere. It's where you source, it's how you run the factory, it's how you run the fleet, it's how you manage the stores, it's how you do take back. All of that stuff is driven by a combination of people doing their work and tech doing its work. All right, folks, there you have it. Radical Reinvention Episode 1 is in the books. Thank you to Jasmine Donovan, president at Dick's Drive-In, and Saru Jayaraman, president of One Fair Wage, for being our very first guests, and to Colin, Gilbert, and Eddie Toledo from 0100 Research for helping us dig into some of the data. 0100 community members can check out the full interviews and our extended conversations online at 0100.com. See you next time.
This episode of Radical Reinvention was produced by Kevin O'Mara, Taka Zen, Nick Heineman, and me, Victoria Marin. Colin, Gilbert, and Eddie Toledo contributed research insights for the episode, and it was mixed and mastered by Ko Takasugi Chernovin, who also composed our theme music. To find out more about 0100 and to check out our content library, go to 0100.com. If you're interested in joining our community of contributors, send us a note at hello@0100.com.